the Gospel of John. Friends, we've got one chapter to go, 2 Sundays until we finish the entire Gospel. Can you believe we've gotten through the entire Gospel in 2 parts in the past couple years? That is incredible. And as we get ready to finish the Gospel of John, a lot of people have noticed that when you get to John 20, it's a nice, perfect ending. You had Thomas with his bold movement where Jesus brings him from doubt to faith, and then John concludes by reminding us that many other things have happened. Jesus did many other miracles and signs, but these have been recorded so that you may believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And it's like, you can't get any better than that. But then John tacks on John chapter 21, one more chapter, and he's giving us a little epilogue, if you will, just as he gave us a prologue on his gospel. And today we're going to have a fishing story. Any fishermen in here? Any of you like fishing? Raise your hand if you like fishing. At least a couple people. A couple people. We got a couple fishermen here. Okay, good. We can persecute you this morning. Now, I am not really a fisherman. In fact, my grandfather, bless his heart, was a very big fisherman. He loved fishing, and so when he finally got his one and only grandson, he was really hoping that he could bring his grandson along into his love and passion for fishing. But unfortunately for him, I was more interested in throwing rocks in the pond and scaring away all the fishes than I was in fishing. So that was a bit of a disappointment. But I have a good friend named John. I met him in college. He's a pastor down in Pennsylvania now. And he has a really great fishing story that I wanted to share with you this morning, because he does love fishing. And when he was young, his dad would take him to fish, often down at the Jersey Shore. He would take him and his twin brother, Jimmy. Now, John got all into the fishing, but Jimmy, probably more like me, not really that interested. So Jimmy would spend most of his time on the seashore collecting seashells, that kind of thing, while John and his dad went fishing together. And so, to John's surprise, as he got older, one day Jimmy came to him when they were adults and said, "John, do you want to go fishing?" John thought, well, I love fishing. Sure, this will be great. And so he gets all excited, and he gets all the gear ready, the tackle, the poles, the bait. And they get in the truck, and they head down to the shore. And once they get there, John starts unpacking everything, getting everything set up to fish. And Jimmy just kind of starts to wander off and do his thing. And John thinks, okay, interesting. And he's going back and forth from the truck to the spot, to the truck to the spot, unloading and setting up. And Jimmy's nowhere to be seen. He's over there doing his thing. And John's becoming increasingly frustrated. And eventually, he goes over to Jimmy, and he asks Jimmy, "Do you want to come fishing?" And Jimmy, with a little smile, kind of responds to him, "I already did my fishing." John thinks to himself, "You already did your fishing?" And he asks that, "You already did your fishing?" And Jimmy says, "Yeah, because the purpose of this trip wasn't for us to go fishing. The purpose of this trip was for me to spend time with you." Aww. And you know, I feel like that's a good setup for this chapter in John, because it's like John didn't have to add in this story, but he's going to tie up loose ends. He's going to give us one more opportunity to spend time with Jesus in a real special and precious way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the first part this week, and then next week we'll wrap up the book and the chapter with the second part. So today we are looking at life with our resurrected Lord, because that's really what it is. I think in this last chapter, John gives us a couple more precious lessons on what it means to live as followers of the resurrected Jesus. And in the first part of these 14 verses, we'll see the disciples looking for Jesus, waiting for Jesus, and then we'll see the joys of living with Jesus. So that's where we'll be. And let's start the story. Let's start as the disciples are looking for Jesus at the beginning of the chapter. Remember, this is after the resurrection. It says, "After this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias." That's the sea, another name for the Sea of Galilee, by the way. He revealed himself in this way. I love that language, by the way, revealed himself. Don't we love it? The idea of the risen Lord revealing himself to us. Amen? But here we go. Simon Peter, Thomas, called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, Zebedee's sons and 2 others of his disciples were together. And I love this little name drop here. We've got 7 of the disciples in this scene, and he drops a bunch of the names. And it's like we're getting one last get-together with the cast before the closing of the curtain, right? And you know I'm a nerd. You know my 2 favorite things are Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, right? So I'm imagining the end of the Lord of the Rings where the fellowship is together again after everything that's happened. Or the end of Return of the Jedi, and you've got Han, Luke, and Leia and the Ewoks all partying after the big bad people have been defeated. There's no Ewoks in this scene, sorry. But, we're kind of getting that feel from this scene. And it's like a little review almost of where we've been in the Gospel of John. First, of course, we know Simon Peter, right? We know Simon Peter. We know his story. We know the denial and everything he just went through too. And then we have Thomas. We just looked at Thomas's journey of doubt not too long ago. And apparently Thomas was either a twin or twin was his nickname. We don't know, but interesting note there. And then we have Nathanael. And some of you might remember that all the way back in John chapter 1, Jesus encounters Nathanael. So again, John is making us think back to the very beginning of his book. And in that story, Nathanael hears, hey, we met some preacher from Nazareth. And Nathanael's like, Nazareth? What good thing ever came out of Nazareth, that little place in the boondocks? But then he meets Jesus, and Jesus can just tell some things about him right away. And then Jesus tells him this, Nathanael, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Now, we don't know what Nathanael was doing under the fig tree or when he was under a fig tree, but Jesus knew about the fig tree, Nathanael knew about the fig tree, and Nathanael knew that Jesus shouldn't know about the fig tree. And so Nathanael's like, holy cow. And then he falls on his knees and he's like, Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel. And then Jesus says to him, Nathanael, because I said you were under the fig tree, do you believe in me? You are going to see greater things than these. And Jesus was true to his word, wasn't he? So we got to call back to Nathanael. Then we got to call back to Cana of Galilee. What miracle, Bible scholars, happened at Cana of Galilee? Jesus did what? He turned water, into wine. Very good. That was his first miracle recorded in the Gospel of John. And then we got Zebedee's sons. That's James and John, and 2 other disciples. We don't learn their names, poor guys. But it's just, again, this kind of nice, fun regathering of the cast. John is reminding us that we are coming full circle in our story of the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. But we are told at the beginning of this story that the disciples are by the Sea of Galilee, seemingly doing nothing. Seemingly doing nothing. Seemingly waiting. And John doesn't tell us what they're doing or why they're doing nothing. Let me give you an educated guess as to what's happening. John likes to leave out details that we should know from the other Gospels. He wrote his Gospel last, so he assumes we know some things. And one detail John doesn't mention is that after Jesus rose from the dead, he told his disciples, I will meet you in Galilee. So here's me putting 2 and 2 together. I think the disciples, following Jesus' words, went up to Galilee to meet with him, and now they're up in Galilee, and they don't see Jesus. Jesus is nowhere to be found, at least for now, right? And so I just imagine them, sitting around the room, staring at each other, drumming their fingers on the table, thinking to themselves, so, what do we do now? Where's Jesus? Have you ever found yourself in a situation of waiting for Jesus, friends? Have you ever found yourself in that kind of situation, waiting for God to show up? For God to act in some way. You believe God raised Jesus from the dead. You believe Jesus is Lord. You know, I know not how you're going to work, Jesus, but I know you're working. I know you've promised to work in this world. You've promised to meet me in this journey of life, but where are you? Where are you? Are there any particular areas in our lives where we are struggling to find the presence and the guidance and the life of Jesus? Peter, of course, who's a little impetuous, but also a natural leader, is the first one to act in this story. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter said to the rest of the disciples. We're coming with you, they told him. And they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. There's a little kind of a dramatization for you there, so you can picture the fishing boat, Sea of Galilee, what the scene might have looked like. Now, some people criticize Peter in this moment. They say, Peter seems like he's acting out of impatience or frustration. Or maybe some even make the claim Peter is doing something like this. He's like, all right, enough with this fishing for men business, enough with this sharing the gospel with the world. Jesus hasn't even showed up yet. I'm just going to go back to what I know. I'm going to go back to fishing. We all remember that fishing was Peter's profession. Now, I personally think it's probably pressing the text too hard to think that Peter's doing some big act of disobedience and turning away. But still, even if Peter's not doing that, it's still interesting and worth reflecting on. Are there moments when life or faith get tough for us? When God doesn't show up like we've expected and our temptation is just to give up? To turn away, to go about our business, to go back to what we know. Well, Jesus isn't going to show up, so I'm going to bury myself in my work. I'm going to bury myself in my hobbies. I'm going to bury myself in the busyness of life and just let it take over. I heard one pastor put it this way. Before he knew Jesus, his life was pretty simple. He would go to work so he could make money, so he could spend that money on things that would bring him fun. And that was just a cycle. Work, money, fun. Again and again and again. And it was very, very empty. As much as he was seeking joy in life, it was very empty. And here's the thing, friends. If we try to go back away from Jesus, if we try to let this old Jesus thing go after we have truly tasted of who Jesus is, we're going to find the same exact thing. They go out, they go fishing, and what happens? They catch what? Nothing. Nothing. They worked all night and they caught nothing. And not too long ago, Jesus had shared these exact words with his disciples. The night before he died, he said to them, disciples, apart from me, you can do nothing. And they got a real strong reminder of that in this story. And friends, maybe some of us, this is another connection point for our hearts in this text, maybe some of us are struggling with a feeling of emptiness right now. We feel empty in our work. We feel empty in our efforts for our family. Maybe we feel empty in our efforts for church or for ministry, pursuit of love, whatever it might be. It could be an emptiness apart from Christ because we're throwing ourselves into these things without seeking him, without the blessing and empowerment that Christ alone can give. And even if we throw ourselves into our work or school or whatever it is, and we find success, all too often that success, even itself, will feel empty. You can feel empty with nothing, and you can feel empty with everything, right? But it might not be because we're not seeking Christ. We might feel empty, and we are seeking Christ. We are seeking to be faithful in our lives. We're trying to follow his word. And so let me ask you this question, friends. Why does God allow us often to experience dry seasons in our lives? Can you relate? Dry seasons where his presence, where his blessing seems absent, and sometimes you feel like you're trying to do everything right. We know the end of the story if you read the whole thing. We know Jesus is here. Jesus is intending on blessing them. Here's one reason, I think, friends. Why did Jesus let them struggle all night and catch nothing? Well, when things are going well, we can look around us and think, I feel pretty good about myself right now. I'm doing pretty good. I must be doing everything right. But it's only when we come up empty that we find ourselves falling on our knees and really believing the words of Christ. Apart from me, you can do nothing. That success you thought you worked so hard for and you earned, that was a gift, child. That was a gift that I gave to you. But if you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. And we find our hearts saying, Jesus, I can't. I can't make this work. More than anything, more than success, I need you. And that's when we're ready to receive God's blessing. And when we finally do receive the blessing, as they're going to later in the story, we realize the blessing wasn't from me, the blessing was from him. And we give God the glory, and we use it for God's glory. Now, I told you I think some people were too hard on Peter. I don't think Peter was running away trying to be disobedient. Honestly, I think Peter was probably thinking to himself, well, we're all sitting around here doing nothing, waiting for Jesus. We might as well use our time profitably. I'm going fishing. We got to eat, don't we? Maybe we'll make some money along the way. Let's go do something. And the rest of the disciples are like, you know what? You're right, Peter. Let's go. Let's do something. And here's something else we can learn, I think, from friends. If that's really Peter's attitude, then that is a good thing. Whatever we're doing, whatever we're waiting for in our lives from God, it doesn't mean we need to sit on our hands while we wait, right? If you're praying about that job opportunity God's going to provide for you, well, go look for a job, right? If you're praying for a relationship or for fellowship or for friendship in your life, well, go places where you may run into good friends, good Christian believers who might encourage you and you can build friendships and relationships with. If we're looking for the school, pursue school. If you're looking for a ministry in the church, what's my spiritual gift? I don't know where to serve. Well, dive in somewhere and start serving, because when we step out in obedience and faith to the call of Christ on our lives, that is very often when Christ shows up. So there's a good principle here for us. There's a great little book, if you're ever looking for something on this topic, called Kevin DeYoung. It says, "Just do something, Christian." And it's just a short little encouragement. It's like we can overanalyze the will of God. What does God want me to do? What does God want me to do? I got to find the perfect thing, the perfect job, the perfect school, the perfect person. And he's like, just faithfully pursue something, and God may meet you in that moment. God may bless you. And even if we fail, just like the disciples failed, God can still meet us in it. So Peter's attitude, I think, is an encouragement to us. And one last thing, friends, as we get ready to transition into what Jesus showing up on the scene, I like it how Peter gets others involved in his decision. He's like, I'm going fishing. And they're like, all right, that's a good idea. We're going with you. And when we're making big decisions in our lives, it's so helpful to have other godly Christians, friends coming alongside of us saying, this is a good decision. We support this. We see wisdom and value in this. That really affirms us that we're heading in the right direction. So I love it that Peter has that in this situation. But now, let's transition to the part where Jesus shows up, because now it's going to get good. All right. Verses 4 and 5. When daybreak came, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Friends, Jesus called to them, you don't have any fish, do you? No, they answered. We don't know why they couldn't tell it was Jesus. It was early in the morning, it was dark, he was far away, maybe they couldn't see him. We've also got this thing going on when Jesus appears after the resurrection. It seems like he kind of supernaturally hides himself for a little bit sometimes until he's ready to reveal himself. So could be either one. Cast the net on the right side of the boat, he told them, and you'll find some fish. So they did, and they were unable to haul it in because of the large number of fish. Okay, fishermen, here's where I get to pick on you a little bit. When you've been fishing all day and some stranger, some bozo, comes along and tries to give you fishing advice, how's that going to go, usually, right? Are you usually very receptive to that advice, right? You've been fishing all day, catching nothing. Someone comes up and they're like, you know what? Just take your pole and throw it on the other side of the dock. Then you'll catch something. You're just like, I'm not so sure about that. So giving advice to professional fishermen is probably not a good idea, but in this case, they know something is different. They know that they should listen, and they do, and what happens? All night they caught nothing, and all of a sudden there are so many fish in the net that they can barely drag it up. What makes the difference in life, friends, between success and failure? Between fruitful living and fruitless living. In this story, John reminds us of something incredibly important, something essential. The only difference in this story was obedience. Obedience. It seems like such a small thing, flopping the net onto the other side of the boat. Sometimes obedience can seem like a small thing in our parenting, in our work, in our personal lives, but it's never a small thing to God. And God so often blesses and uses that obedience to bear much fruit. I heard one pastor put it this way. I thought this was super helpful. He said, this story reminds us that competence and diligence, right? We think being good at what I do and working really hard, that's what's most important to success. But he says, no, listen, competence and diligence don't matter nearly as much as the blessing of the Lord. It is better to be obedient to God first and add to that competence and diligence than to simply rely on our own efforts and abilities. More than our efforts, we need God's blessing in our lives. And after they see that miraculous catch, here's what happens next. The disciple, the one Jesus loved. Who's the disciple who Jesus loved? Bible scholars? John. We've seen that title many times. The disciple, the one who Jesus loved, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." He realizes it is the Lord. Have you ever encountered a blessing in your life, friends? After working and realizing you can't do it on your own and realized and called out with your heart, it is the Lord. I can't help but think of our housing situation recently. That wasn't from us, it was the Lord. And I can't help but think of the many prayer answered testimonies I've heard from you all just in the past few years. When our efforts are fruitless and God shows up, we can say with joy and a smile on our face, it is the Lord, and we give him thanks. Have you seen the Lord show up for you this year yet, friends? Amen? Have you seen the Lord show up for you? We have, and so we take hope. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tied his outer clothing around him, for he had taken it off. He was stripped for work, if you will, and he plunged into the sea. Good old Peter. And there's something sweet about Peter's eagerness, right? There's Jesus. Boom. He's in the water. He's swimming to shore. Of course, he's not thinking about all the other guys, because what are they doing? Since they were not far from land, about 100 yards away, the other disciples came in the boat dragging the net full of fish. Thanks, Peter. Thanks for leaving us. But his heart is sweet, isn't it? He is just happy to see Jesus. And I think, friends, this story makes even more sense. Some of you were making this connection already, even as we were reading, because one of the reasons I think they realize it's Jesus is because this story is reminding them of something that happened right at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, right at the beginning of their meeting Jesus. You're going to get 2 stories for one today, okay? No extra charge, 2 stories for one, all right? So now let's take a quick look at a story found in Luke chapter 5 and see if you can make any connections as we read. This is back at the beginning of the ministry of Jesus. As the crowd was pressing in on Jesus to hear God's word, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, Sea of Galilee, many different names. He saw 2 boats at the edge of the lake. The fishermen had left them and were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, which belonged to Simon Peter, and asked him to put out a little from the land. Then he sat down and was teaching the crowds from the boat, a nice little natural podium, if you will. And when Jesus had finished speaking, he said to Simon, Put out deep into the water and let your nets down for a catch. Master, Simon replied, we've worked hard all night long and caught nothing, but if you say so. Can you catch the attitude there? I'll let the nets down. What does this preacher know about fishing? Come on, Jesus. But when they did this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets began to tear. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled the boat so full that they began to sink with the fish. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Go away from me, because I am a sinful man, Lord. For he and all those with him were amazed at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, Zebedee's sons, who were Simon's partners. Don't be afraid, Jesus told Simon. From now on, you will be catching people, fishers of men, right? Then they brought the boats to land, left everything, and followed Jesus. Did you catch all the connections? Catch? Did you catch all the connections? And here's one beautiful thing, friends. At the end of the first story, when Peter encounters the power, the goodness, the holiness of Jesus, what does he do? He falls down at his feet and says, Lord, get away from me. I don't deserve this. I am too sinful to be in your presence. Now, Peter, a year or two later, remember the same Peter that denied his Lord 3 times, we'll revisit that next week, sees the risen Jesus perform the same miracle, and what does he do? Does he run away? No, he runs to him. He runs to Jesus. Friends, we're about to celebrate the Lord's table together, and I wonder if some of us are going to approach the Lord's table today and feel this in our hearts. Lord, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. But a heart that has been touched and changed by the grace of Christ does not run from Jesus because of our sin. It runs to Jesus because of our sin. We're about to run to the table together. Let's wrap up this little section in John. When they got to the land, they saw a charcoal fire burning there with fish lying on it and bread. Bring some of the fish you've just caught, Jesus told them. So Simon Peter climbed up and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And even though the net was not torn, even though there were so many, the net was not torn. 153 fish. I know fishermen are known for their exaggeration of their catch, right? How big was that muskie? It was this big. I don't think they were exaggerating this catch, though, right? And some people have wondered, 153, what's the significance of that? What's the symbolic significance of 153? Well, here it is. I think John said that they caught 153 fish because they caught 153 fish. That's the significance, okay? And, people like to read into details sometimes, and that's not always helpful. But this is one of those little details, friends. If you're reading an ancient legend about some hero, they don't throw in details like this. 153 fish. This is the kind of thing that reminds us we are reading an eyewitness account of what happened. Now, one last thing before we move on from the 153. So, how did they know there was 153? Was like Nathaniel like, hold on, this is what Jesus, 1 second. 1, 2, 3. They had to count them at some point, but they probably counted because they were taking them to market or something like that. So anyway, just an interesting detail. What happens next? Jesus tells them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them. Can you think of any other time important in the life and ministry of Jesus when he took bread and gave it to them? This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Jesus, the resurrected Lord and King of the universe, is cooking his disciples breakfast. Can you imagine Jesus whipping up some pancakes, bacon, and eggs for you tomorrow just because he loves you? Can you imagine that, friends? Do you think he would? Yes, he would. We might have doubts in our hearts. Yes, he would. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Isn't this beautiful? And here's a reminder, friends, lest you worry that heaven will be boring. Jesus has a resurrected body and he's eating. That's good news for us, right? And none of the disciples, including Thomas, had any doubts about who it was. It was the Lord. And friends, let's think about our own lives for a second. No matter how much we may be struggling with any particular challenge in life, think on those moments when you saw God working and had no doubt in your mind, it is the Lord. He is here. So whether we are sitting right now at the side of Jesus, rejoicing in his blessing and care for us, or we find ourselves still on that boat the night before, straining and sweating and coming up with nothing, Jesus is there both times, isn't he? Jesus is present. Jesus is planning on blessing. All we have to do is wait and believe and obey. And he will find us. He will find us. Next week, we'll finish the story and see the special conversation Jesus has with Peter as he finds him. But let's take this image with us as we go to the table. Where are we waiting on the Lord, friends? Let's wait on the Lord together at the table. Ushers, and deacons, I'm going to invite you to come forward as we get ready to serve. When Jesus was celebrating the Last Supper, he said, "Truly I tell you, I am not going to drink again of the fruit of the vine until I drink it together with you at my Father's kingdom." You notice it didn't say that Jesus drank any wine at that breakfast, did he? They often carried very diluted wine around with them. He didn't drink any wine then. He was saving it for that final day. He was saving it for you. For you, friends. Jesus invited his disciples to sit around a table with him that morning. Jesus is inviting us to sit around the same table with him right now. So let's do that. Let's come with hearts in full assurance of faith that the same love he showed them is the same love and faithfulness he will show us.